Yeah, good evening. It is Sunday, the 31st of August. Yes, it's still August, even though we've all been back in school at least a few days. I've been back over a week, and it's 6:45. So this is the time we're going to meet. Well, hopefully, we're going to meet every Sunday and prepare for our junior cycle higher level English exam, which is going to take place in the first week of June next summer. So you're all very welcome. I don't know if there's anybody on the call yet. This is the first evening, and there might be a few people going to watch it back or um, might be live on the call. There's a chat open. I can see already. I've got a hello, so hi to you, and you'll be able to ask me questions later on in the class um, as things come up during the class. Every Sunday, I'll be throwing questions at you. We'll be using that chat quite a lot. For the first while, I'll have to manage that so that loads of people will jump on the call and they'll be like, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you covering this? When are you doing this? So I'm gonna control all that for the first while, and then I'll answer all those questions as we go forward. So look, let's get going. Loads of people here. Brilliant. Hello everybody and welcome. So the first couple of minutes, I'm just going to show you around the platform. Now, if you go onto our YouTube channel, you'll see that Tracy Gannon, our brilliant geography teacher, made a video, and ordinary level maths teacher made a brilliant video in which she kind of gives you a guidance on how to navigate the platform. So I think that's something that's worth looking at. It's a half an hour long, that video, but I'm just going to show you what you need to do for English. Just concentrate on that for this evening. So you can see the screen in front of you. There's the platform. There's Susan teaching away Leaving Cert music. And I'm going to press the subject tab at the top of the screen there. So if you see where the Grinds 360 logo is, just to the right of that, it says Home and Subjects. And the Subjects tab will hopefully open. There it is there. There's your subjects. Now, there's an arrow on the right-hand side, just in the box in which Rob is smiling back at us there. So I'm going to tap that arrow a few times. There's Tracy. And I'm going to tap that arrow until we get across to Junior Cycle English, which there it is there now. Okay. So can you see Junior Cycle English, Irish Maths? And I'm going to tap on Junior Cycle English. And this is really important because this is where you're going to find the video content that you're going to be able to use as the year goes on. It's where you're going to be able to find the recordings of the classes if you miss a class, for whatever reason on a Sunday. But it's also very importantly where you're going to be able to find the notes for each class. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of that page. And by the way, I'll be adding more material to that as you kind of make requests to me as the year goes on. I will make more video material to put on the platform. But down the bottom there, you'll see it says JC Notes. Now, every week, that's where we're going to begin the class. We're going to go there, and that's going to be filled with a lot of notes as the year goes on. Now, you will have a book as well. The digital book is on the platform already. The hard copy books are going to be posted out in the next couple of weeks. Essentially, we have a huge, it's one of those problems that is called a good problem because we've got huge numbers of sign-ups. I think I was told today we had 22,000 books across the various different subjects printed. So that's a big job getting all that stuff out to you. But in the first couple of weeks, we'll be using the notes in the platform. I will generally use the notes in the platform a lot. The books are kind of an addition to the work that we do, and sometimes I'll be looking at it. But when you're coming into the class and you're looking for what's the notes that we're using this evening, you go into English, Junior Cycle English. Then you just simply scroll to the bottom of the page and you'll see the documents. And that's the way we'll work. And I'll begin every week by saying that. And every week, somebody will be on the call and they'll arrive late and they'll say, Paul, what notes are we using today? And I'll go a bit like this. And then I'll tell them and then we'll be grand. Okay. So we'll get to know each other. But hopefully, as I said, we'll have a bit of crack as well. So do you need a copybook throughout the year? That's up to you. Different people will use the platform in slightly different ways. So for the live classes, if you want to take notes, you could use a copybook to take notes. You can also use an iPad. I often think it's and again, I know not everybody can do this, but I often think with the platform that it would be good if you had the same setup almost that I have. So I have the screen in front of me here, but I also then have my iPad that I can work on and make notes on. So even if you had the class even on your phone, and then you had an iPad or a tablet that you could make notes on, that's another option. But again, that's entirely up to you, and you'll figure out the best way to manage that yourself as the year goes on, Mohammed. Okay. Okay, so those are the notes, and if you tap on those notes, they automatically download into your Grinds 360 folder on your device. So that's set up. You don't have to do anything else. As soon as you open them, they automatically download onto your device. Okay, so it's really, really, really easy. So tonight we're going to be looking at an overview of the paper that was examined last June. I'll take about, well, I hopefully not too long to do that, 20 minutes or so. And I'm going to start the first few weeks by looking at poetry. Now I know straight away you're all sitting there going, oh bloody hell. But poetry is a big part of the exam. It's a big part of, so I'm going to go out with that now. So that's the platform. Poetry is a big part of your preparation. Understanding poetry is something that is important, is an important skill. Understanding how to interpret poems and how to write about them is an important skill that we have to develop. And it's something that's really kind of easy to do in the first few weeks. So that's the plan. We're going to go through the 2025 paper bit by bit over the next few weeks. And we're going to then also look at various different poetry sections. If you have any questions about anything that I'm saying about, like in class at any stage, pop them into the chat. Any kind of questions overall about what I'm going to be covering and so on and so forth, just hold them until the last 10 minutes. And that's when I'll open up the chat to take any questions that you might have on that. Hello, Philip. How are you? So here's my little folder on my iPad of the notes that I'll be using. If you look here, sorry, wasn't meant to do that. What about one? I don't know how to do that. So this is the book. Okay, and I'm not going to go through it now, but there's a digital version of the book on the platform. And it has, so this is a draft version, so there's a contents page obviously on the real one. And there's loads and loads of different sections to the book. But generally what I do is I look at past exams. I look at past mock exams a lot, because obviously in class you'll be looking at the past exams like in your day school with your day-to-day teacher. But the idea is to build the skills, build an awareness of what you could be asked and what effective answers look like. And the book is filled, that's just the introduction, filled with loads of examples of, sample answers to various different tasks, examples of how to analyze different styles of writing. We'll go through that when we all have the copy of the book, which you'll certainly all have a copy of the book by the end of September. Okay, so let's get going. Here is the 2025 exam. We're going to start with that. Again, if you arrived late, I'm sorry for being annoying now, but if you arrived late, I'm just going to show you one last time. If you're on the platform, you go to subjects, you scroll across the top line by using the arrow, you will come to Junior Cycle English. Click on that. There's the book at the top of the page, and the notes are at the bottom. I'll actually get the notes moved up to the top of the page for next week. And we're going to be using all three of those documents this week, okay? So if you want to click on all three of those documents and download them onto your device, but they will also be on the screen in front of you. So again, Mohammed, you might want to have them on your device in front of you, or you might just want to use the screen and take your physical notes. It doesn't make any difference. It's entirely up to you. Hello, guys, and welcome. Okay, so here we go. Nice and easy, nothing difficult. I'm going to just walk through, as I said, it'll take about 10, 15, 20 minutes to go through this paper, just to talk about the different elements that were examined. So you know what to expect. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know here. The exam is 2 hours long, and there are usually 10 sections. There's a multitude of different types of questions that you could be asked. In 2025, as they will for you, they gave advice on time management. They said here, if you look, that section A, you should spend about 30 minutes on it. Section B, about 30 minutes. And then 25 minutes on section C and 30 minutes on section D. And one of the things that we're going to have to get a grip on as the year goes on, and we're going to chat about all this, and you'll be giving out to me. Yeah, again, Jack, I remember I said, folks, a few minutes ago, I was going to go, right? So, Jack, I presume you jumped on the call slightly late. Yes, there will be. As I said, if there's any questions you have about what I'm saying in real time, throw them into the chat. If there's specific questions about the course and about what you're doing and how that's going to correlate with what I'm doing, I want you to hold those until we get to the last 10 minutes. Okay. Again, I've just answered that question. Okay. So there you go. There's the time management. And again, the reason I'm highlighting that from last year's exam is because that's one of the things that's going to drive you mad this year. If you're somebody who works hard and you want to make improvements and you're applying all the different kind of disciplines that I'm going to try and teach you to, help you move along, one of the things that students really find difficult is getting everything answered in time. And that's something that we have to be aware of early doors. That's something that we've got to manage and practice, because no matter how good you are, if you can't get all of the questions answered on the day in the exam, then you're going to be in trouble. And that's going to explain some of the kind of maybe advice I give you that might clash with some of your teacher's advice, because the advice I give you will always be focused on that day next June, those 2 hours, and the best way to manage them. Okay, so last year there was 4 sections, and let's have a quick look what the sections were. So there was an unseen poem. We're going to actually have a look at that particular poem next week in class when we look at a bit of unseen poetry. But it was an unseen poem, followed by a question that was worth 10 marks. In the poem, the speaker was reflecting on her life and wishing she lived a simpler life. Which part of her reflection do you find most interesting? The question was easy, but the poem was tough. So it was a tough start to the paper. The second question was tricky. It required you, and this is why poetry is so important, to demonstrate knowledge of techniques that you might see or understand through your study of poetry: tone, enjambment or enjambment, run-on lines, or symbolism. And what you had to do was identify where those features were in the poem, but then you also had to explain how they impacted your understanding of the poem. And of course, if you want to understand the difference between like ordinary level English and higher level English, or somebody who's going to struggle to get a merit in English and somebody who's going to easily get a merit and hopefully go beyond that, it's those two different instruction verbs. To identify is simply to say, look, that's a symbol, that's enjambment. I've learned that, I can recognize it. That's assimilate, that's a metaphor. There's personification, that's a soliloquy. All those techniques that we'll work on as we go through the year. That's the easy part. And in a question worth 15 marks, you can pick up 6 or 7 marks by just identifying successfully the examples requested. But this part here, the explain part, that's the hard part. That's where most of you will already probably be nodding your head saying, yeah, that's what I find difficult. It's not spotting the answer, it's articulating the answer. It's your ability to explain and develop and expand your points in a way which is clear. I've been teaching English, junior cycle English, since 1990, well, English, Leaving Cert and junior cycle English, since 1997. So I'm coming up on 30 years of this. And in that time, that is the number one issue that the hard-working student finds the most difficult to overcome. That articulation, that ability to not just know what you're looking for and be able to identify techniques or identify answers. It's that critical thinking, that ability to analyze and to express your thoughts in language which is clear. That's where people fall down. So we're going to do loads of work on that every single week. Every single week it's going to be look at past questions, do a bit of analysis of the question and the text that we're talking about that week, and then the explanation part, the hard part, the writing of the answers. So that was the unseen poetry questions. And then you had studied poetry. Now, so that means studied poetry came up in 2025. And again, you might not know this, but there are 4 studied sections on your junior cycle exam. Okay, I went through this when I did the August course. I have a little PowerPoint presentation that I'll actually throw up into the notes for you as well. which breaks all this down. Excuse me. I will drink a lot of coffee during these classes. Studied poetry, studied film, studied drama, and studied novels. You're supposed to have one film prepared from a list of films. Actually, do you know what I'll do here? Really quickly, I'll show you. So there you go. There's the list of films. And your teacher's going to pick one of those films and prepare that film for you, and you'll study it in class, and you'll have to be able to answer questions on it. When it comes to drama, there's the list of plays. In theory, you're supposed to have 2 plays prepared, and because you're all higher level students, one of them must be Twelfth Night, As You Like It, Much Ado About Nothing, Julius Caesar, or The Merchant of Venice. Now, the vast majority of you will be preparing The Merchant of Venice, and that's why I'll spend some time on The Merchant of Venice. There's quite a lot of video content on the recorded material on the platform on The Merchant of Venice. But if I'm in class one week and say, Kira says to me, Paul, I'm doing As You Like It. Is there any chance you could do a sample answer next week in which you integrate As You Like It? That's the kind of thing I want to be able to do for you. I want to know that that's required. I want Kira to give me a question maybe that she had that she found tough. And then I'll go off and I'll create a note, and everybody will benefit from looking at that note, even if they're not studying that text, because they're still learning the skills of interpreting questions, how to integrate learn material, quotation information, and write effective answers. So you're supposed to have 2 plays, but the vast majority of teachers will only do their Shakespeare play and a section of another play. Now, if your teacher has done a full second play, that's brilliant, but it's very unlikely that you'll need to do that. There we have our list of novels. You're supposed to have read 2 of those novels across the course of 2nd and 3rd year. Again, I'm sure I'll get people later on in the class saying, what novel will I be teaching? And my answer will be, I'll preempt that question. I won't be teaching any novel. I have sample answers on at least half of those texts. I have little notes with key characters and key quotes on 10 of those texts. But say, for example, if Ava says, Paul, my teacher's reading Sense and Sensibility in class because she wants to put my class to sleep. It's a great novel, but it's torture for junior cycle. But Ava might say to me, have you got a note in Sense and Sensibility? And I'll say, no, Ava, I don't have a note in that, but I will next week or the week after. And I'll go off and I'll put a short note together. And then if I'm doing a studied fiction section, I'll make an answer in which I integrate Sense and Sensibility. So that's the way it's going to be. Most of you will be doing text like Of Mice and Men. So I've loads of stuff already on Of Mice and Men. The Outsiders will be very popular, always very popular. Noughts and Crosses, quite a lot of people study. Trash is quite popular. But generally, if I have Of Mice and Men and Outsiders done, the vast majority of students have at least one of their novels. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to hit bases, because you can see there's loads of people on the call. There will be loads of people on the call doing different texts, and I will respond where there's requests to notes on the individual text, but generally it'll be covered because most teachers do the same stuff in class. Now, the important thing when it comes to poetry is there is no studied poetry section. Sorry, there's no prescribed material for the studied poetry section. So your teacher can pick any poem you want, any poem. You just have to prepare, and again, we'll talk about this as the year goes on. You have to prepare. Sorry, if you wonder what I'm doing as I'm doing that, I have a screen over here where I'm just checking for questions if there are any. So you'll have 3 really well prepared. Like, I took over a 3rd year class, higher level 3rd year class this year from a different teacher. So that teacher has done 5 or 6 poems last year with that class. I'll do another 5 or 6. And then I'll get the students to zone in, to pick the 3 that they like best and have those 3 really, really well prepared for the exam. That's good advice. So your teacher might say you have to have 4 really well prepared. That's fine. 3 is the ideal number. But you will have read lots of poems, hopefully, over the course of 2nd and 3rd year, because that will give you the skills that you need. We're going to look at loads of different poems, even starting that process tonight. And then, lads, this is one thing I'm going to tell you now. It is the 31st of August. See, old man had a brain fart straight away. It's the 31st of August. And already I'm going to tell you something that is going to happen next June when you walk in. There'll be a surprise. the pattern seems to be over the last few years, since the COVID break, when junior cycle came back, that we've had 3 exams, that there's always a little surprise. And last year, I'm going to show you what the surprise was last year. Last year, the surprise was, and it was only a small amount of marks available for it, but it totally, it got all of the reaction from junior cycle students. The surprise was that they asked specifically on a short story. Now, lots of students won't have had a short story prepared. I didn't do a short story in this class. Now, it's not my role to cover every single base. My role is to build your skills and demonstrate, approach the exam and all those kinds of things. The core material, that's your teacher's job. But I hadn't done one now. I have done one now. It's on the platform. You'll see it's called Guests of the Nation. But that was a surprise for a lot of people. And there was only 15 marks for that question, which means that statistically speaking, you could still get a distinction even if you weren't able to answer that question. But that's an indication of the fact that there's going to be little surprises, and we'll make sure we're ready for them to the best of our ability as the year goes on. So I'm just going through the paper, as I said, looking at the different sections. So there was a studied poetry section, and it was a very easy studied poem question. You had to talk about 2 poems. We'll talk about this. We'll look at this specifically in a few minutes. 2 poems which broadened your understanding of the world. And we'll break that question down shortly. Next, after poetry, there was a drama question. And again, a question I get asked, Paul, are you expected to fill up all of the space? So there's that question. It was worth 20 marks. Are you expected to fill up all of this space? And this space? And this space? And of course, the answer is no. Some of you you'll have different sized handwriting. Some of you will write faster than others. Some of you will write too much and make mistakes. Others will write a little less, but be a bit more careful. So the reason that they give you so much space to write in is to facilitate for all of the different thousands of students and their different approaches to the paper. There was a section on drama. It was accompanied by this really superfluous or unnecessary graphic and explanation of a couple of dramatic terms. And then it was followed by 2 really, really easy questions. If you had your play prepared. And if you have your play prepared, again, the play, again, to preempt some of the questions that might be asked towards the end of the class, the play I'll be looking at this year will be, the majority of students will be studying The Merchant of Venice. So we'll be looking at key scenes from The Merchant of Venice. If you want me to look at key scenes from other plays, as I said, I absolutely will do that. Shakespearean plays, I mean, not the other ones, not the non-Shakespeareans. There's too many there. But if you look at this was an easy question. Plays are often enjoyable because of their moments of suspense. Think about your play. Have you read it yet? Select a specific moment of suspense from the Shakespearean play you've studied from the prescribed list, and look at the instruction verb. Very, very, very easy. Describe this moment. Okay, so you're going, woohoo, easy peasy. I just have to describe a moment in the play that I think is suspenseful. But no, look, explain why this moment is suspenseful. So again, that's the difference. And you'll find, maybe you're not even aware of that lots of you find that little step from describe or identify to explain really tricky. To say something is suspenseful, to summarize a scene, to offer quotation that you've learned from that scene, to say that it has tension and you're able to vary your vocabulary and a sense of anticipation, that's all very good. But to explain how the writer created suspense, why the moment is suspenseful, that's hard. Okay, that was tricky. And look, they specifically mentioned the Shakespearean play. Now I'm going to try again and preempt questions as they come in. Paul, yes, is it possible that next year they could ask you to write about your non-Shakespearean play? Of course that's possible. Is it likely? I don't think so. But is it possible? Yes. And what do we know about the examiner? The examiner is going to have a surprise on the paper. So maybe that's something that we need to be very, very, very acutely aware of in our preparation. And as we work together every Sunday evening going through the year, we'll make sure we have all those bases covered. So there was study drama, there was unseen poetry, there was study poetry, there was study drama. That question was worth 15 marks. That was the easy one. And there was a second study drama question based on the same play. Reflect on the resolution. What is the moral or lesson an audience might learn from the resolution? Now, again, you might say to yourself, Paul, what the hell is a resolution? But this exam helps you. Resolution is explained here in the little graphic at the beginning, which I said served little purpose, but this bit did serve a purpose. The resolution is the author's opinion about the subject matter is revealed, and sometimes a moral or lesson is learned. So the resolution is the way the play ends. Actually, I'm just looking there, that they didn't explain that, so you had to know what resolution meant. It's the way the play ends. And you have to ask yourself, and again, I've written a sample answer that we'll look at not this week or next week, but in the weeks coming, in which I have written a distinction level sample answer to that question on the Merchant of Venice. But if you're doing Julius Caesar, or if you're doing one of the other Shakespeare plays, and you would like me to write a similar response on those to show you how to do it, again, you let me know week 1 and you'll have it week 2. So I will respond. That's why that section of the platform that I was talking about with the notes, that's going to get really busy really quickly, because I'm going to be throwing loads and loads and loads of documents up onto that platform, both documents that I've already prepared for you, but also ones that will be written in response to your requests to the work. So there was a question, let's keep it going. So remind ourselves, study drama was worth 40 marks last year. Poetry combined, this is out of 200. Poetry combined, unseen and studied, was worth 35. So 75 marks for those first 2 sections. Then there was a question on your studied film or novel. Now, this is again something that I've noticed in the last couple of years. They're packaging in 2 of the studied sections together so that every studied section is examined, but you don't have to answer on every one. So last year, if, for example, you walked in and you read this question, so I'll mark it from here because this is the question. Write a short essay, ridiculous thing to say, a few paragraphs, worth 25 marks, say 3 to 4 paragraphs. A short essay on how your perspective or opinion of a central character developed as you studied the texts. So perhaps you've studied The Outsiders and Ponyboy is your central character. And you look at that question under the pressure of time and you think, Jesus, I'm not quite sure how my perception of him has developed. I don't really see that. But then you don't have to answer on it because it said novel or film. And you might think, oh, well, I'm doing Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, for example. And my opinion of Miles Morales changes completely as the movie goes on. Like, I know what he's like at the beginning. He's kind of carefree, typical teenager, living with his mom and dad. He's quite funny, gets embarrassed by his dad, makes a fool of himself when he leans into one of the girls in school and gets his hand stuck in her hair. But then as the movie goes on and he experiences grief and his uncle is killed and he becomes heroic and he grows in strength in his identity. I really admired him. Okay, I'm going to write about my film. So that was a really interesting and I thought really fair question because it allowed you to choose from 3 different prepared texts, either one of your 2 novels and your film. Any one of those would have done, and the question then was quite simple and it gave you a bit of a plan. And if you'd written a paragraph on the key decisions the character makes, a paragraph on some of the dialogue that the character uses, and a paragraph on how this character interacts with the characters, for example, as paragraph topics, they give you a little plan there, you would have been fine. But you could have ignored those instructions as well, as long as you answered the question. So that was worth 25 marks. Let's keep the maths going. So studied poetry was worth 35. Studied drama was worth 40. That's 75 in total. Studied fiction and film together was worth 25 there. That's 100 marks so far out of 180. So let's just have a little check and see, was there a second question on that? There wasn't. So 100 marks on across your studied drama, studied poetry, studied film, studied novel, and another 15 on the short story, which again counts as studied. So I'm going to get my little calculator here now. That means that last year, 64% of the available marks were on studied material. So the text that you were supposed to have prepared before you walked in. So that's is it unusual? Slightly. It's usually closer to 50-50, the allocation of marks, but it shows you how really, really, really important it is to have your studied material ready. But it also shows you that there are other things you have to do, and this is where hopefully I'll come in, because I expect in school most teachers do the work. You know, you'll have your play ready, you'll have your poems ready, you'll have your film studied. But where a lot of students really struggle is on the unseen material, which is either reading comprehension or creative writing. And last year, 65 of the available marks, or 35% of the available marks, were 36% were going for your ability to respond to creative writing or reading comprehension tasks. Let's have a quick look at those tasks before we go back and do a little bit of work on poetry. So the first one, there was this very, very simple, very easy comprehension passage, followed by this question. Based on the interview, what question could Leon ask next? Write the question. That's the easy part. Remember what I told you? There's always an easy part. There's 15 marks here. You can pick up 6 or 7 of those 15 marks really easily. In other words, they don't want anybody to fail. But what are you going to see? Explain your choice. So not just what question do you think Leon should answer next? Sure, anybody can write that. But what you're really being examined on is your ability to give an opinion. It's your ability to give that opinion in a logical way. The explanation, of course, must be based in the passage that you've just read. So there's an expectation that there will be quotation in your response. And where the vast majority of students will fall down is they're afraid of writing something that's wrong. There's no wrong answer to that question. Your ability to be original and creative in response to a question like that, that's one of the things that the examiner's looking out for if they're looking to give you 12, 13, 14 out of 15, which is the higher merit stroke distinction grades for the question. Now, again, I'm just giving you an overview, but you can see there was lots of different tasks on last year's paper. The second comprehension stroke, creative writing exercise was question 9. You've been asked by the RTE Media Department to write a short creative social media post advertising this podcast, the one that was in number 8. The post will be accompanied by a link to the episode and a picture of the presenter. The social media post should aim to attract people to listen to the podcast and get reposts from other social media users. Write the text of the post below. Now, again, that's a really interesting question, only worth 15 marks. The vast majority of candidates won't score above 10 out of 15 there. 10 out of 15 is 66% of the marks. 66% of the marks is a merit, which is not a bad result, but my ambition is for as many of you as possible to aim for higher merit grades, and maybe you might hit that top 2% in the country. It's very hard to hit the distinction. But if you look at that, that question was requiring you to understand advertising and persuasive language, to know how to use language to impact on people, to attract people, to manipulate people. That's work we're going to do this year. We're going to look at the elements of persuasive language, and we're going to study advertising, because there is precedent for an advertisement being on the paper. But you can also see that creative writing section would have rewarded a student who knew how to use language in a persuasive way. And then, of course, this idea of a podcast, we'd have to think about, what does a podcast look like? They're trying to integrate modern media into the exam, and that's work that we will do as well. We'll have a class on how to produce, how to write a podcast, what the features of a good podcast would be. That's something that shouldn't have taken us by surprise last year. The final question on last year's exam was, if I can say it was weird, it was just, it felt like they were like, okay, let's give them we gave them a tricky one to start on. Let's give them a really easy one to finish on. So it says the extract below comes from the graphic novel Global by Owen Colfer, the great Owen Colfer, Andrew Duncan and Giovanni Regano, who were the artists. Inspired by the visual and written information supplied in the graphic novel extract, write a diary entry from this character's perspective just after the moment, 25 marks. We'll get to that as the weeks and months go on, that question. I thought it was like unbelievably easy. I thought it was ridiculously straightforward. But I have spoken to a number of students who sat the exam last year, and they said they found it tricky. And the reason they said they found it tricky is because they came to it with 5 to 10 minutes left. They found it really tough to be focused enough on being able to study that graphic image, read the dialogue within the graphic image to glean the information that would have helped them write the diary. And it was interesting that they put a section at the end of the exam worth 25 marks. 25 marks is a big chunk of marks in an exam, out of where maximum marks is 180. And a lot of students said to me when I discussed the exam, we're back in school, talking to guys who are now in 4th year and 5th year, that they wished that they had looked through the whole paper quickly at the beginning, and they would have done that question nearly at the beginning, because you can answer the questions in any order you want, and they were raging because they fear that they've dropped easy marks there. So that's an overview of last year's paper. And if you look at the notes that I've given you, sorry, now I cleared all that off earlier on. It's very annoying. I went through it all with the pen and I cleared all that off. So I don't know why it didn't save as cleared off. Anyway, so what I do then, what I'm going to be doing is, okay, there's a question. These are questions. Okay, then there's notes and sample answers on how to respond to those questions. And what I'll do is, I'll just get rid of this stuff here. I'm not doing this evening anyway. But what I'll do is, I'll constantly challenge you to tell me how to improve my answers. I'll tell you, look, I think that's an 8 out of 10. I think that's a 15 out of 15. I think that answer is a merit standard answer. I think that answer is a higher merit. I think that answer is an achieved. I think that one is a distinction. I'll give you answers that go right across the gamut. And then I want you to challenge me and say, no, Paul, I don't think that's a higher merit. I think that's a distinction. I don't think that's a higher merit. I think it's a merit. I don't think that's a merit. I think it's an achieved. Because I want you to be thinking about the way you write. My aim this year, and I know there's always two aims. I know I always fail with the first one, but the second one I would hope that I am somewhat successful with. My aim this year is to try to make English a little bit more interesting than maybe you find it if you don't really find it interesting. If you do find it interesting, hopefully you'll find the classes enjoyable. But my aim is to try and make the stuff interesting because I absolutely love it. But my second aim is to give you the skills and the strength to go into the exam confident that you can score the best score that you can get. Now, I won't be marking your work. I'll have thousands of students on this platform. So you can't send work to me so I can mark it. But what we can do is look at sample after sample after sample and think together and critically appraise and critically analyze so we can break down work. So when you're sitting down doing your homework or doing your exams, that you'll have a better idea of what you want to do and what mistakes maybe you want to avoid. So this is the document. I'm not going to go through it now, in which all of the sample answers are provided for you. And I'm just going to start by looking at this section here. Now, the question asked you to identify the following 3 terms as they are used in a poem, and it asked you to explain how the use of each impacted your understanding of the poem. And there were the 3. There was tone, enjambment, and symbolism. Okay, so that required you to have a knowledge of those terms and to really understand how those terms might impact the reader of a poem. And I think a lot of people will find that tricky. And then the studied poetry question, as I've already said, asked you to talk about 2 poems that you have studied. Why did that not stay when I deleted? I wiped all this out. 2 poems you have studied, and to outline how each poem gave you a broader understanding of the world. Now, so this is our cue to begin the real work, the stuff I enjoy. And this is what we're going to be doing over the course of the next, certainly 2 weeks, probably 3, is taking a deep dive into poetry. And then we'll come back to those questions and we'll see how I answer them. So we're going to go now to the next document. And that is the document that's on your downloadable notes section. And it's entitled Junior Cycle Studied Poetry. Sorry, no, I shouldn't have done that. Studied Poetry Note Part A. Okay, so there's 3 junior cycle studied poetry notes. One I do now. We'll be coming back to poetry before the mocks. That's the second one. And then at the end of the year, there's a revision one, and that's Part C. So if you click on that one, you will see this document. And now we're going to have a look at a couple of poems. I'm going to do the work that I like to do. My wife said to me before we started the class, she said, good luck, and I hope it goes well. And I said, it won't go well. The first one's always boring because I have to introduce and, show the students the different, elements of last year's paper before I can get down into the work. So apologies if it's been pretty boring thus far. Okay, so studied poetry. We know that poetry, I know you know this, is all about, and you could see that in the 2025 exam, your ability to understand thematic concerns that might feature in a poem, and your ability to comment on the techniques that a poet employs to communicate their theme, or to create rhythm, or to provoke the imagination and create imagery. So it is a basic requirement for you to go into the exam knowing what theme means, being able to talk about what thematic concerns are and why they matter in a general sense, but also specifically in relation to 3 poems that you're preparing, and to be able to explain what different poetic techniques mean. We'll look at all of the different poetic techniques this year, be able to identify examples of them as was requested in the unseen poem, and have examples of some of them prepared for your studied poetry as well. So what is theme? And I know you know this already, so if you have any questions, throw them into the chat there. We'll keep this really simple. So theme, that's what the poem is about. It's the reason the poem was written. And we're going to take a look at some poems, thinking about this, certainly one tonight and a number next week and the week after. So sometimes the theme isn't what really matters. Sometimes the poet is just messing about, trying to perfect the sonnet form, or the villanelle, which is a particular type of poem, or the haiku, which I'm sure you've looked at in first year, especially if you had a student teacher. They always like to do the haiku as a class with junior cycle students or first year students. Sorry, I shouldn't have moved that. However, usually poets write because they have something to say. So the theme refers to the subject matter of a poem. And it's really important that you understand what the phrase universal theme means. And it's really important that you are able to talk about how the universal theme makes the poem relatable. So if a guy is writing about his animus towards officers who stay in the base while the soldiers go up the line to get slaughtered, or if he's writing about peeling the potatoes with his mother on a Sunday morning, or if a woman is writing about racism and the practice of lynching people from her community in a poem like Strange Fruit, for example, no matter what the poem is, there will be some element of it which is relatable. So in Strange Fruit, for example, you might not be somebody who's ever experienced racism. You certainly are not somebody who's lived in the particular places in the United States in the 1930s, where that poem is inspired by. But you understand justice, you understand injustice, you understand what bigotry and discrimination are, you understand what suffering is. Those are universal themes. If you have never been in that kitchen with Seamus Heaney as he and his mother peel the spuds for the dinner, you have a parent figure in your life. You understand what relationships are like between young people and parents. You understand how they can be difficult. You understand how sometimes you're closer to your parent in that first decade of your life, and that as you become older and become more independent, and that relationship can become strained. So again, you can relate to the poem. And it's really important that whatever poems you're preparing, you can do the ones your teacher's doing, or you can select any of the ones that I'm going to do with you. I've already got loads of them done in content on the platform, but I'm going to do more as we go through the year. It doesn't matter what poems you're preparing, just make sure you're able to explain what is universal about the thematic concerns that makes the poems relatable. So let's take an example that many of you will have studied, and that's the poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. Now this poem is really, really simple thematically. Now I'm going to read it really quickly, and then we're just going to have a little chat. Just not talking about the language, we're just going to talk about the theme, about why Yeats wrote the poem. So the first reason he wrote the poem is because he's a poet. He likes writing poetry. It's his passion. But what I'm saying is, what's he trying to express about his life when he writes this poem? And how could that be, or what elements of the poem might be interpreted as being universal and therefore relatable? I'm reading this poem because I know you probably know it. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree. And a small cabin build there. Sorry now. God damn it. There we go. Of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there. A hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee loud glade. And I shall have some peace there. For peace comes dropping slow. Dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I'm not marking those parts because that's really more to do with the language. I'm just looking at theme here, okay? I will arise and go now. For always night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. It's very hard for me not to mark that. There's loads of things going on there language-wise, but we're just talking about theme. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Now, imagine you had that poem prepared for your exam, and you were doing the exam last summer, 2025. And this was the question that you were asked. Select any two poems you've studied as part of your course. Outline how each poem gave you a broader understanding of the world. You may not use the printed poem on the page. So when you read that poem that we've just looked at, you realise, Christ, that was an easy question. I mean, when I read that poem, that definitely broadens my understanding of the world. Now, I'm sure on a normal evening, and we won't do this evening, I'll say to you, right, off you go. There's loads of people on the call there. One of you, tell me what that poem is about. What's the theme of the poem? And you'll all fill up that box. I'm sure you could do it right now if I asked you to do it. And if I said to you, what's universal about it? That's the bit. Remember I said, identify is easy. Explain, that's the trickier part. That's the bit that most people find more difficult, okay? But look, you can all see, I'm sure, thematically what that poem is about. So he celebrates the beauty of nature in the poem. He says he doesn't like being in the city or an urban environment. But the most important thing is that in that poem, he's expressing a powerful desire to escape. And escape, while it's very personal to him, is one of the most obvious universal themes that there is. This is a poem about love and celebration. Everybody understands what love is. Everybody has things in their life that make them happy and that they, when they think about it, appreciate. And everybody, maybe you're feeling it right now, as you're bored listening to me. Everybody understands what it's like to be in a situation which is uncomfortable, a situation which is not where they want to be, and everybody can visualize, imagine, or dream about a life which they think would be better and more enjoyable. And that's all Yeats is doing in this poem. He's talking about his desire to change his circumstances, to escape from pressure. We all understand what that means. To escape from unpleasant conditions. He wants to change his life for the better. So you can see how reading that poem broadens your understanding of the world. It shows you how life can be really tough and difficult, even for somebody who might be respected or regarded as very successful, and even to have a life which might be regarded as enviable. It shows you how we're all connected. Yeats died in 1939. He wrote that poem 50 years prior to that. So the poem was written over 100 years ago by somebody you've never met, who lived in circumstances vastly different from your circumstances. And yet he was writing about themes which are similar to your experience of the world and are relatable because of that. And that shows the commonality of human experience. And it also shows the power of the written word. So that question was easy peasy lemon squeezy. And all you had to do was write a couple of paragraphs in which you included some of those quotes. He says, go, go, go. Look, see? And I'm sure you all know that's called repetition. And I'm sure you all know that repetition creates emphasis, placing stress on a point or underlining the importance of a particular point. So he wants to go. The island that he invents, it's not a real place that he wants to go to, is called Innis, which I think means isle or island, and then Innisfree. So it's not exactly subtle. He wants to go to a place where he will be free, which would suggest that he doesn't feel free now. He feels overwhelmed by life. So what he wants is to simplify his life. Look, he doesn't want to live in a big gaff. He wants to live in a small cabin. He doesn't want to have to build something complicated. He wants to go back and live in something that we might have lived in 1,000, 2,000 years ago during um, the Bronze Age. Clay and wattle are rudimentary building materials. He doesn't actually mean he wants to live in a cabin made of clay and wattle. He means that he wants to live a simpler life. And the cabin and the clay and, sorry, the small cabin, the size of the cabin and the materials used to make the cabin are emblematic of representative of, symbolic of um, that desire to live a simpler life. So is the food that he wants to eat. The desire to be alone would suggest that he feels that unhappy, that his relationships are not beneficial, that there's a sense of there's too much demands on him. We can infer all of these things. There's loads to say, but the most important thing is he says, "I want peace," and not does he say that he doesn't say it once. He says it twice, which is again an example of repetition. And if he wants to go there, go, because he wants peace, peace, that suggests, that infers, that communicates, that conveys. And again, we're going to try and learn all this language. This is how we explain points. That suggests, communicates, conveys, infers that he's not at peace now. And if he's not at peace, it means he's troubled. And if he's troubled, that's why he wants to get away. And all of us in our lives, every one of us, no matter how good things are, will experience difficult times and long to escape those difficult times, will feel overwhelmed by the demands of life and relationships and want to escape to something less demanding and more simple. And therefore, this is a quintessential poem with a universal theme. So that's what you have to do when you're looking at whatever poems you're studying. Have it clear in your head. Okay, thematically, I know exactly what this poem is about. I get it. And I have these quotes ready that will allow me to explain what this poem is about thematically. So that's theme. Now, you can see down the bottom of the page, I've got those little notes. I'm just conscious of time now. I'm going to turn over the page really quickly. And next week, this is where I'm going to begin. We're going to talk about style, because you saw that last year on the exam, there was a style question on unseen poetry, which makes it extremely likely that on your exam in 9 months' time, or whatever it is, 10 months' time, there will be a studied poetry language question, and we've got to be ready for that. But we won't do that now. We'll do that next week. For the time being, it is a couple of minutes left in the class. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask me now, general questions, throw them into the chat and I will answer them for as long as it takes. If it takes longer than a couple of minutes, I will answer them away. I hope you found that in some way useful. You have an idea now of how the class is going to be. Lots of analysis, lots of looking at speeches, poems, extracts from novels, examples of writing, breaking it down, thinking about how you can use the information that we glean from them to become more educated and to build the strength that we need to do better at English. Yeah, Julius Caesar, no problem at all. Now, Julius Caesar, I've taught Julius Caesar as a play myself in class, so I've got quite a few bits and pieces on Julius Caesar. So when we get to the study drama section in a while, it won't be certainly in September, I'll make sure that I load up all of Julius Caesar little notes and sample answers and key quotes that I have for you. And then we'll talk about it in class when we're looking at questions on study drama, and I'll include Julius Caesar in that work. Yes, The Weight of Water is a novel that I've taught before. It's a lovely novel, Sam. Again, I've got a very short note on loads of the novels in which I have, Sarah Crossan obviously is the author of The Weight of Water, the characters, the key moments and the key quotes. And then we can talk about incorporating some of them. But remember, I'm not going to be teaching you your play. I'm not going to be teaching you your novel. That's what you do in school. These classes are going to supplement the work you do in school. But where you find a gap, that's where I'll be able to help you. Now, Jack, I didn't say trip you up again. Be very careful. I mean that there will be a tricky question. There'll be something unexpected. So, for example, here's a good example. Um, the couple of years ago, for the very first time ever, never happened before, they required students to write about 3 poems that they'd studied. So up until that point, a lot of students were being told by their teacher, just have 2 poems prepared, you're sucking diesel. Never in the history of the junior cert or junior cycle had there ever been a question where 3 poems were prepared, 3 poems were required, but that was within the spec of the curriculum. So the examiner was it was a bit tricky, but it was not unfair. The same with the short story. The short story I showed you in the prescribed material is on the prescribed material, but because it had never been examined, teachers had fallen out of the habit of teaching it and students had fallen out of the habit of preparing it. So it wouldn't surprise me this year if there's something similar, and it probably will be something to do with drama, but sure, we'll be as thoroughly covered as we can be, but I'm not going to second guess what the examiner is going to do. My role here is to try to make you feel that you're strong enough to cope and adapt no matter what they ask you next June. Okay, we happy enough with that, folks? Anything else? If not, I'm going to say thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you. I hope that you found the class in some way useful and you know exactly what we're going to be doing next week. We're going to be looking at poetry, loads of different poems in class next week, loads of different elements, talking about the language, and then getting to that poetry question from the 2025 paper. So I'm going to say good evening. I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'll see you next Sunday evening. Cheers, folks, and goodbye.